Hello everyone, my name is Isrena Fewings from the University of Western Australia, and it's my pleasure to introduce Joy Camero and Carrie Din from the University of Calgary. Joy and Carrie's paper is entitled Reflection as a Gateway to Sustainable Change in STEM Lab Teaching and Learning. So this will be a 20-minute presentation with a 10-minute Q&A at the end of the session. I invite you all to pop your questions into either the chat, which is located on the right-hand side, or feel free to raise your hand. The icon is available in the top left-hand side. This session is being recorded, and Joy has kindly uploaded the presentation attachment, which is available at the bottom of your screen. You may need to refresh your screen to see that content availability. This session is being recorded, and we invite you to turn off your video and microphone while the presentation is happening. However, there are some reflective points, so at those stage, please, feel free to turn it on when appropriate. So, Joy and Carrie, over to you, and you can start whenever you're ready.
Okay, it looks like, Esrina, I was trying to follow the instructions there, but it wants me to quit Chrome, which means I would be kicked out of this session, so I think we'll have to do without the PowerPoint slides shared, but like Esrina said, they are available as an uploaded attachment. So if you want to just download it and follow along as we go through, thank you for being patient with us. But yes, thank you everyone for being here with us tonight, or I guess today for some of us. As Irina introduced us, I'm Joy, and I'm co-presenting with Dr. Kay Din tonight on reflection as a gateway to sustainable change in STEM lab learning and teaching in both practices and culture. Carrie, do you want to take us through?
Yes, thank you, Joy. Right. So it is my pleasure to be here with you and my fearless graduate student, Joy Camero, who is handling this new technology and this really cool opportunity to be with you from Canada. And I know that as many of you are in Oceania, maybe you're all over the world. So firstly, thank you, gratitude to be here with you from both of us. And the presentation we're sharing tonight is part of a larger 3-year project that we, my educational leadership partner, Dr. Martin McInnes, and I have been leading. We are in right now year 3. And to summarize, the project is really a culture change project, as Joy mentioned. It's something where we knew that the traditional style of laboratories in exercise physiology, where students were following a recipe and really confirming a known result and almost faking science, needed to be changed. And so that is the inspiration. That is what keeps us going. That is absolutely our ultimate challenge, to modify labs. And tonight what we'll focus on is really how we have invited the instructional team to use reflection and a community practice approach to accelerate and improve and really find their teaching and learning way into these reform labs, such that they're supporting the student experience and learning as best they can.
Right. And I think.
Right. So we have a couple of reflective questions, and they're on the slides. That says before we dive in, we're really hoping if you're here in the audience with us, that you could jot down what you're most curious about. Why is it you wanted to come to this session? And then what you're hoping to learn when it comes to STEM and reflection tonight. And just jotting that down really to set your intention for the next 18 minutes or so.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Carrie. So we're going to dive right in. We'll start with talking about what makes a teaching and learning culture. So that should be slide 3 on the deck there. And if we take a step back a little bit, there are many ways to define culture, but when we define it as the shared norms, beliefs, and values of a group, and carry that definition into teaching and learning, then it's made up of the norms, values, and even shared assumptions that guide instructors and their practice. So, for example, an aspect of this culture can be what is valued most when it comes to assessing students. What and how are we assessing? It can also be how students are perceived in the learning process. Are they being seen as active agents in their own learning, or are they being seen as empty vessels to be filled with information? And how this culture is created or maintained is through the actions and interactions of the individuals subscribed to that culture. So they establish meaning within this culture through what they say and do. And if we look at when we strive to influence culture, one way that we might be able to do that is through influencing what's called the communication pathways, or the conversations where we can implement practices like reflection, which Carrie's going to talk about in a bit. And I just wanted to note something that Roxa and colleagues, which is the paper that we kind of got this culture definition from, is they reiterate the importance of respect and trust in order for the influencing to happen, because there is a lot of vulnerability that comes with being willing to change or be influenced. Carrie, I'll pass the mic on to you. Talk about reflection.
Thank you, Joy. Yeah, and definitely speaking of vulnerability, so this is slide 4 if you're following on the deck. The reflective practices that we've infused into this 3-year project, which is happening both at the master's level in our course-based masters and then at the undergraduate level in a large required exercise physiology course, we really are asking all of the instructional team, and quite honestly, all of the students involved, to, which isn't part of what we're going to talk about tonight, but those GTAs, those graduate teaching assistants, lab technicians, instructor team, Joy and I, we are all really engaging in this fairly substantive processing and meaning-making practice that Dr. Jennifer Moon would call that moves our learning from surface to deep. And this reflection that we're striving to use really demands that we explore and process perhaps unstructured things, complex things, really take the time to dive into what it is that we're doing in our teaching that enables or creates barriers to student learning. So there's a really beautiful connection through doing the cognitive housekeeping, is what Moon would call it, not only on our own, and there's lots of SSOTL work that would show that teaching can be quite an isolating practice, but in fact that we can do it and do social reflection and social processing, all in the service of evolving our teaching practice such that it better and better enables student learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, talking specifically about teaching-focused reflection now, it is clear from the literature that it really is beneficial all around. So on slide, I believe, or it should be on slide 5 right now, this is not an exhaustive list of the great things that come out of reflection, but one of the things is, it allows us to explore and scrutinize our influence on student learning. So I know I haven't been in SSOTL for very long, but I know that we talk a lot about making sure that our teaching practices and inquiries are student-centered. And while teaching reflection or teaching-focused reflection might seem like the opposite, because now we're looking back at ourselves and our practices, it's still really about our students, because it's looking at how we influence our student learning. So for me personally, and I have to say that I don't have a lot of teaching experience. I have half a semester of being a teaching assistant under my belt, but personally, I think this is a chance to reflect, for example, in the realm of equity, diversity, and inclusion, because whether we know it or not, or whether we acknowledge it or not, our assumptions, for example, about certain things and certain groups of people do affect student learning. The other thing is teaching-focused reflection also lets us clarify our purpose and effectiveness in teaching by prompting us to ask questions like, why am I doing what I'm doing? And is what I'm doing still working, not just for me, but my students? And the last point is especially pertinent in group reflections, because when we reflect on our teaching with other people, our thinking is strengthened. We can also be more accountable for our own teaching. And we also open doors to new ways of thinking and doing. So, I mean, it sounds like a win to me, all the wins to me. I'll pass it on to Carrie again.
Thank you, Joy. Yeah, that's fantastic. And if you are following on the slide deck, I'm going to touch on and there's a beautiful symmetry. It's slide 6, and I'm going to talk up the 6 phases of reflection that actually mirror the scientific method. So there's something quite beautiful happening in this project. I'll talk a little bit about our dear colleague, Dr. Martin McInnes, who is the exercise physiologist, who is the instructor at the heart of every point of influence and culture change we're making. So Martin had to really agree not only that student learning was so important, that the labs really needed to be reformed to enrich student learning, but also that reflection could find a place in the world of exercise physiology. And in fact, when you look at this paper, and I encourage you, if you're really curious about, we have on the slide kind of a reflection in STEM, a question mark. We have a beautiful piece here by Dr. Carol Rogers, a paper I do recommend you take a look at if you're interested in. What Rogers does in this paper is makes clear sense of a lot of the different things the great and well-known philosopher John Dewey wrote about experiential education. And in fact, if we look at these 6 phases that Rogers itemizes with more detail than I will tonight, there really is, whether we're reflecting on our teaching practice or whether we're reflecting at the end of a lab activity, there is this very rigorous scientific process that we should bring to life and that is at play. So very simply, that first part is an experience happens. And in our project, we've modified most of the learning activities actually that happen in lab, and in our community of practice, the experience is always each week, how did our teaching go? And it's really quite simple that we reflect out loud on how things went, what went well, and what may be problematic that we can help each other with. And in that moment, phase 2 happens in our COP. There's this beginning of a spontaneous interpretation of what happened, and definitely the same happens in the lab. I won't go into great detail on that, but there really is this mirroring of what we're doing together in our community's practice with what we're asking students to do in their new revised learning activities. So there's this beautiful pattern I find in the way thinking about reflection in a more systematic way. It also helps quote unquote scientists perhaps see that this is really a part of the habits of minds of being a great scientist, because after those initial interpretations, then there's this beginning to surface and intellectualize what the problems or interesting questions might be that one could ask, and in the end start to not only explain but develop a hypothesis about. And to whip through to stage 6 of reflection, if we put it in terms of teaching again, so I'm dancing between being in the lab and being the teacher, enabling learning activities in the lab. Really, that final phase is deciding, all right, what am I willing to try? What am I willing to test or give it a go in my lab when I am really structuring the learning environment. And that new experience, which takes us up to step one again, really is a drive to experiment and to play with a new practice in a safe environment.
Thank you, Carrie. We are now moving on to slide 7. Again, if you're following using the PowerPoint slides. And Carrie talked briefly about the 3-year lab reform project that we're working in. And a big component of this project is creating the community of practice with the instructional team of the exercise physiology course for each term. So that includes the course instructor for that term, the graduate teaching assistants, and also a lab technician. So the community of practice met weekly for 30 minutes before their traditional lab meeting where they prep for the lab for the upcoming week. These 30 minutes really is intentional, and it's where we reflect together on our teaching for that week. So things like what went well, what didn't go well, and what we wanted to work on. And based on, moving to the next slide here, based on the individual interviews that we've had so far with the instructional teams, there are 2 early findings that we're seeing. And the first one is that reflection is a necessary tool to continually assess and improve practices. And this was realized even by those who were initially skeptical about reflection. And I mean, just keep in mind the context that we're working in and the people that we're working with. These are people who are deeply rooted in the science of where reflection really is not the norm. And the next thing that we're seeing is the shift towards a teaching culture that really advocates for students' academic development, curiosity, and learning. So what we're seeing here, hopefully, are the beginnings of sustainable change in STEM labs, specifically in science labs, where we're not just changing the activities and the assessments, but really digging deeper through reflection and influencing the culture that really ultimately produces the teaching and learning behaviors and practices that we see in the labs. So just to be cognizant of time, we do have 2 quotes that we included in our slides there, but I'll leave you to read those, but I will give you some context on for those quotes. So the first one is, I should take a step back. So the graduate teaching assistants were from the community of practice that was completely online. So the labs that they were teaching were online, and so were the weekly meetings that we had. And the first quote is from a graduate teaching assistant talking about the impact of taking the time to reflect on our teaching and doing that as a group. And the second quote is a graduate teaching assistant talking about a shift in their perspective about the online learning context and seeing the value of this new learning experience and getting to share that with their students. So if you get the chance, please do read those quotes. It's always good to get the perspectives and hear from the actual people in this project that we're working with. Carrie, I'll pass the mic on to you to wrap us up.
Yes, so thank you, Joy. We want to special shout out to Dr. Mark McInnes, our colleague, and then Dr. Leslie Reed, our Vice Provost Teaching and Learning, for supporting this project. And we want to end our session with a question about 2 questions. What did you realize during the session, and what are you still left wondering about that perhaps we could answer? Thank you so much for your time and for caring about student learning.
Thanks, Joe and Carrie. Very insightful presentation indeed. And Melissa, I see you were part of the participants, so
hi.
I invite you to if you have any questions or any commentary.
Yeah, I do. Sorry, excuse my appearance. It's been a very long day here and it's late at night where I am in Canada. I think this is really interesting, and I like the way that you have formalized the reflective process by like making it something that you do each week, because I think often we do it informally and casually when we come across our colleagues, and I think the downfall of that approach is that then not everybody gets included, and sometimes then also you don't make time for it when things get busy. So I think one of the things that stood out for me is this idea of a more formal structure around those reflections. So I think that that's something for me to take away and reflect on. I guess one of the questions I had as I was listening on this, the power of reflection in teaching, is have you thought about, and I'm sorry if I missed this, I got kicked out of your session briefly, I got bumped and then I came back, but have you thought about also including your students in that kind of weekly reflective practice? Your undergraduate students?
Joy, is it okay if I take this one?
Oh, absolutely.
Melissa, they actually do in the undergrad, each lab they engage, so they do a 3-hour lab each week. There is a post-lab reflective question, and sometimes they're very much about processing what just happened, but other times they prompt students to consider their own learning and the ways their choices in lab may have supported or inhibited their own learning. So there is an echoing. I would say for it to be amazing, we would have a closer alignment by even simply saying to students, what supported your learning this week and what got in the way of it? Because I think when we've asked them that at the end of the course in a survey, and it's fantastic what they're telling us. But I think the consistency in asking them every week to reflect on their learning isn't quite there. But reflection is there every week.
I think that's really great. I know I'm not teaching labs right now, but I do a middle of the term learning reflection with all of my students, and same thing, they don't want to do it. They're like, oh, give me a break, learning reflection. And then I have students after like, wow, this was really helpful. And I always find the feedback really interesting. I teach at MacEwan University, which is an undergrad only institution here in Canada. And so we actually have full-time lab faculty who teach all our labs because we don't have graduate students. And so in one way it's really interesting because we have full-time employees. There's almost no turnover. We have kind of a group of people that have tenure and they're going to stick around forever. But I think they would love this idea, and it's something I'll definitely suggest to our lab supervisor team.
Yeah, we keep it really simple, but what we do is we protect the time. And as you say, Melissa, we include everyone to the point of we literally, sometimes it probably feels, Joy, like we're passing around the mic, but we do want we know everyone taught that week, and so it's a nice way. The technician reflects, and then the lead instructor reflects, and I do, and Joy does, even though we're in different courses. So we try to make it really a circle, a space. I know there's pressure on all of us, but we try to be just very real and say. And it's interesting, some folks don't want to say what went well, but something went well for everyone, and I hope we're modeling that by finding those little highlights. Yeah, it's I enjoy it. We do it on Fridays too, which is nice. It's a nice way to end the week.
Yeah, and Joy, what about the mentorship aspect? Because I thought, like, what an amazing example to set for graduate students about the importance of reflective practice. So have you learned through this process as well as kind of a new teacher?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I feel pretty lucky actually because I have this embedded in my week. In my own TA group for the course that because there are a few of us, we do have a debrief at the end of the week, but having this on top of that, I think definitely, makes me think more about my own teaching that week. And there's certainly lots to learn from Carrie, from Martin for sure, and from the other TAs too, right? Even if we are teaching different courses. I think Melissa got kicked out.
Just keep going, Joy. Well, just on that, as an extension of Melissa's sort of question and your response, Carrie, you mentioned substantive processing, the move from learning to deep, and Joy, you were just sort of touching on that in terms of, your reflective and reflexive practices is sort of coming through as your teaching assistant. Stewardship is continuing. So I'm just wondering that at the point of when you actually dove, when you're talking about diving, going into that deep learning, when did you feel that was happening? When did you feel like this was more, as opposed to a rudimentary process, that it was more of an organic kind of process?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I feel like I missed part of it. Was that a question for me?
Yeah, and
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Your question.
Yeah, so basically, just as part of an extension of Melissa's kind of question, when did you feel that it went from, just a learning process as opposed to an actual reflexive, organic learning method, I suppose? It was just you were continuously reflexive and with all of your experiences as a teaching assistant.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably a deep question.
I would have to think a little bit about it because
good. Which is, I suppose,
because I feel really lucky to be able to say that now it is, it feels like a normal, like a practice that it doesn't feel superficial to me anymore, I suppose. So I do have to think a little bit about, when did this become just like, okay, just thinking about the week that I had to actually what just happened with my teaching, with my students learning. Yeah.
And just on that, capturing that experience, I'm wondering how you can sort of navigate that process for your learners as well. Just sort of go, you can identify, from my experience, you can identify X. So when you identify X, that is you going into that deeper dive as opposed to, so that's why, and it's very hard. And I understand it's unique to people, but just capturing X in itself is quite an empowering moment in itself.
Yeah. As we know, that's such actually, I love that question because today, so we just had a lab midterm and a lecture midterm for the course. And I had a couple of my students did just really great conversation about now capturing that X, about their learning that happened in the first half, what worked, what didn't work, and getting to and now the second half, what can we do to make it a better learning space, to make that learning deeper for you. And that's one of the reasons why I'm loving what I'm doing right now, is having those conversations and being in a position where I can hopefully help students get there, right? That I feel so privileged to be able to hopefully do that. I mean, I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, it just reminded me of the conversations that I had today.
It was more of a statement as opposed to a question, yeah.